For the last 6 decades, the Inter-American Development Bank, or IDB, has been run by a South American. But for the first time in its history, the U.S., as the largest subscriber to the organization, wants to place a U.S. citizen in charge. For the U.S., the notion of putting forward Mauricio Claver-Carrón could provide unique leadership to help Latin America and the Caribbean pull themselves out of a recession from the coronavirus. Yet, could the real reason for the nomination by Trump be to woo Latin American voters in the upcoming presidential elections?
With this very exciting new effort, we will deliver a future of greater promise, opportunity, and freedom for our nations. Really, it's a treasure. You are a treasure. The Hispanic Americans and the Hispanic American community is a treasure.
Maybe the nomination is also more than just an act to swing votes, but it also could include the fact that Claver-Carrón is also a key player in the maximum pressure policy against the likes of Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua, which for some in the Trump government are collectively known as the troika of tyranny.
Last month, I issued an executive order to completely freeze the assets of the Maduro regime in the United States. Our sanctions have been tightly focused on closing down every avenue by which Maduro sustains his criminal and totalitarian rule.
Hello and welcome to Economic Divide with me, Kaveh Taqvai. In this week's show, we will be looking at the importance of the leadership of the IDB and ascertain whether the U.S. influence on other organizations like the World Bank and the IMF are becoming too much power for other nations to be comfortable with. Now, don't forget, we would love to hear from you. So if you have a story that you want to share or have any comments about our show, why not get in touch with us via Twitter using the marker ED_program. We'll promise to get back to anyone that writes in, so please feel free to drop us a line. The Inter-American Development Bank was founded in the year 1959 and sought to achieve development in a sustainable and climate-friendly way. The current president of the IDB, Luis Alberto Moreno, has served at the top for 3 consecutive terms and is stepping down after 15 years of service. The bank focuses on 3 key development cores, with social inclusion and equality, productivity and innovation, and finally economic integration being the main values. But the IDB goes one step further and also deals with gender equality and diversity, climate change and environmental stability, sustainability, that is, and institutional capacity, and the rule of law. However, recent events have seen some new priorities hit the headlines, with the impact of the COVID-19 virus be a major issue when it comes to dealing with Latin America and the Caribbean. As we know, Brazil has seen the virus hit over 4 million people, killing around 125,000 people at the time of writing this program, suggesting the IDB, like many other institutions, have their work cut out for the big recovery plan in the near future.
For the last 60 years, the president of the Inter-American Development Bank, or the IBD, has been from South America, reflecting the region in which it is designed to predominantly serve. Yet, after 15 years of service, the current president, Colombia's Luis Alberto Moreno, is due to step down, opening up the opportunity for a new president to take his place, with the US President Donald Trump highly recommending one of his current advisors, Mauricio Claver-Carrón. The nomination of a US citizen by Trump not only brings with it a notion that could change 6 decades of tradition, but more importantly raises several questions. Firstly, why break this tradition? Secondly, is this just another attempt by Trump to have the US power grab an international organization? And finally, is this also an attempt by Trump to be able to put pressure on Latin American nations who refuse to conform to the so-called American way? Certainly, Claver-Carrón has a history of supporting the maximum pressure policies on just such nations, with his hardline approach to the likes of Nicaragua, Venezuela and Cuba. However, it seems that the majority of the members do not approve of the nomination by Trump, favouring the Argentine candidate, Gustavo Beliz. One of the supporting nations of Belize is Chile, who traditionally align with their masters in Washington. However, it seems that they prefer the nomination of Belize, which also raises the question as to why even Trump's closest allies and friends are now beginning to turn against him. With the elections due imminently, watch this space to see who becomes the next president of the IDB and find out whether Trump will be trumped in his pick for the top job.
In 2018, the amount loaned out to the members exceeded $13 billion and allowed projects such as agricultural investment, flood protection, health and education, as well as trade investments, all play a part in helping the member states. Now, talking about member states, did you know that the IDB has 2,000 employees working for the organization, representing 48 member countries and 26 borrowing member nations, with clients of the bank including central governments, provincial municipalities, and non-governmental organizations? Well, the IDB has some pretty impressive investment figures that are associated with it too. For example, did you know that the bank has some $176 billion of total subscribed capital, with $33 billion in total equity, with total assets in the region of $136 billion, and just under $100 billion of outstanding borrowing to be repaid? Some serious cash, I'm sure you'll agree.
With 189 member states and based in Washington, D.C., the IMF employs around 2,700 staff around the world and has assets and borrowed resources of around $693 billion. The birth of the IMF came in 1944 following the Bretton Woods Conference following World War II, and was designed to build economic cooperation and avoid competitive currency devaluations that led up to the First Great Depression of the 1930s. Today, the IMF is capable of lending up to $1 trillion to member countries, offering low rates of interest and even 0% interest to poorer nations who rely on the loans. The IMF publishes a global economic outlook on a regular basis, and no surprises, the year 2020 is not looking good, as the institution claims that the world economy is projected to contract by around 3% this year, with the US economy falling around 5.9%. That of the EU 7.5%, and China growing 1.2%, which, although is positive, is much less than the predicted growth rate should COVID-19 have not hit the way that it did. With the US being the main contributor to the IMF, namely at around $155 billion per year, it seems that once again the US has a grip on an international organisation that it uses as a pseudo-tool for its political gains. This objective is achieved by the US and its closest allies by having the majority percentage of votes when it comes to IMF decisions. This is something it enjoys due to the size of its contribution to the fund. Although the head of the IMF is traditionally European, the US has enough votes to veto many of the major decisions made by the body. Current world debt is looking very bleak, with the current chief, Kristalina Georgieva, highlighting just how much.
Debt has reached all-time high levels, 188 trillion, the equivalent of 230% of world output.
For some nations, debt requires assistance, and when Ecuador, for example, applied for a $4.2 billion loan from the IMF, as well as other loans from the IDB and other institutions, the $10 billion total debt it acquired suddenly saw Ecuador aligned to Trump's foreign and economic policy in the region, hence gaining Trump a new ally and leaving Ecuador cutting up to 6% of its GDP on spending in order to repay back the loans to the bodies they borrowed from, hence making it easy to see how the US can manipulate such institutions to suit their needs.
Joining me in the studio today is Victor Bulmer-Thomas, Professor of Economics and Associate Fellow in the U.S. and Americas Program at Chatham House. He's also an Honorary Professor at University College London and an Emeritus Professor at London University. He's also authored and edited more than 20 books on Latin America and the Caribbean, including The Economic History of Latin America Since Independence. Professor Bulmer-Thomas, many thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, my first question relates to the upcoming nomination for the new director of the Inter-American Development Bank. Now, traditionally, the post has been held by a South American for 6 decades now, yet, well, the U.S. is the largest holder of subscribed capital, wants to place an American in the role, with many in the South preferring the Argentine candidate, Gustavo Beliz. How do you feel this may pan out?
Clearly, the American administration of Donald Trump is doing this in order to curry favor with Latin American voters, i.e., US citizens of Latin American origin, who are going to vote in the presidential elections, particularly in the state of Florida. He has the votes to get this through in 2 weeks' time, but my sense is that in the end, the US administration will agree to postpone till March the final decision, because he can still take the credit for having nominated this individual, but at the same time, he won't risk antagonizing much of Latin America and thereby diminishing the importance of the Inter-American Development Bank.
Okay, in 2018, the institution had approved the lending on some $13.5 billion US dollars. Well, for certain nations, I'm sure you'll agree, this is a much needed economic boost. But does borrowing money from institutions such as the IDB or IMF or World Bank come with a catch, do you think, especially when nations like the US have such a powerful say over them?
Well, of course, it does come with conditions, but the point about the IDB is that under previous presidents, its conditions have been much softer than those applied by the IMF in particular, but also the World Bank. And that's why so many Latin American countries are concerned about the possibility of a hardline US official coming into power, because the likelihood is that much tougher conditions will be applied in the future. At the moment, the IDB, yes, it does have conditions, but they're fairly soft.
And finally, with the COVID-19 virus having such an impact on the world, are there any standout cases of economic issues that you would like to mention? And could any of them benefit from loans like those provided by the IDB and others? Or would the act put them more in debt?
Well, there is a desperate need for additional financing, which cannot be provided locally because tax revenues have collapsed and there's no possibility of increasing them. And expenditure has gone up because all governments in different ways are trying to reach out to that large part of their population that has either lost their jobs completely, lost their incomes completely, or seen their incomes reduced. So clearly, any funding on reasonably soft terms from the Inter-American Development Bank or other sources is going to be welcome. And yes, it will add to the debt of those countries. But what they are hoping for is that the terms of the new debt will be relatively soft. In other words, low interest rates and a long period for repayment. Ideally, these will be provided as grants, but very few international organizations are prepared to do that, although some governments, some friendly governments clearly are.
Professor Victor Bulmer-Thomas from Chatham House, many thanks for your valuable knowledge on South America, and many thanks for your time today.
Thank you for having me on the program.
You're welcome. Okay, we're about to take a quick break here on Economic Divide, but don't go away as we have plenty more coming up. We'll take a look at some of the economic headlines hitting the front pages around the world, as well as hearing from Atefe Padidar as she runs us through some of the stories that she has found on the ongoing developments at the IDB, and a lot more than that. We're also joined by Professor Christopher Bogus from Hull University as he talks about the U.S. control over the SWIFT payment system and how the EU is looking at setting up an alternative global payment system. We'll also take a look at how the U.S. is dominating other global entities, such as the World Bank and NATO. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short message. Hello and welcome back. This is our Info News section where we take a look at economic news from around the world making headlines. In the U.S., survey shows that half there are suffering serious economic hardships and the situation is getting worse. There is nothing for the people we surveyed who earn under $100,000 a year to fall back on, is what the headline read. Now, according to the results, 46% of U.S. households nationwide were experiencing substantial hardships during the disease outbreak. For households with incomes under $100,000, that figure increased to 54%, compared to 20% of those with incomes of over $100,000. Next, on to the UK, where Child Food Poverty Task Force Marcus Rashford revealed a rise in hunger due to the COVID-19 pandemic, reported that tens of thousands of UK children have been pushed into food insecurity. And finally, in the OPT, occupied Palestinian territories, COVID-19 is devastating the already shattered economy. The UN reported that the rising economic cost of the Israeli occupation is exacerbated by the arrival of COVID-19, with GDP per capita projected to decrease by 3% to 4.5%. Those were some of the stories from around the world, but we want to hear your story. If you have a story that you want to share or have any comments about the show, why not get in touch with us via Twitter using the marker @ED_program. We'll promise to get back to anyone that writes in, so please feel free to drop us a line. Let's now take a look at another US-dominated financial institute, namely SWIFT, and look at how the EU is trying to build a new and alternative payment method, and hear from Professor Christopher Boas in the process.
Another global institution, which is heavily under the influence of the US power, is the SWIFT payment system, or its full title, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. SWIFT was set up to replace the aging telex system and currently sees over 10,000 financial institutions across 212 different countries around the world take advantage of the fast transfer system. Figures showed that globally, around 31.31 million transactions are completed each day, with around 7.8 billion made per year, a 56% increase in its use over the last 5 years. But it seems that the US appears to use SWIFT as a geopolitical tool, much like the IMF, IDB and other institutions, with the dollar playing a major role in this power grab.
Up to now, the dominant part of the whole platform equation has been the United States influence, not only in denominations such as the US dollar, but also in utilizing the platform as a geopolitical instrument, as a tool to exercise pressure on other governments, other blocs, trading blocs across the world, to allow certain policy implementation.
For many, the US dominance in such institutions is something that's beginning to worry other parts of the world, and hence why alternative forms of global transfer methods are being considered, with the Europeans leading the way in one such project.
With the blessings of the German government, is developing alternative platforms for interbank transactions. Euroclear is an own platform by the Deutsche Börse and allows the direct competition to SWIFT to take place as we speak. The European Commission, part of the European Union executive, is putting pressure to the European Investment Bank to come up with a denomination of investment practices to allow an alternative to SWIFT in order to promote the euro as the denomination for the currency transactions between banks.
With the likes of China and the EU both counting on using their currencies as a tool to displace the dollar as the go-to standard global currency, as well as the emerging trend of cryptocurrencies entering the market, could such platforms also begin to create the start of the downfall of the dollar, and hence see the US start to lose its grip on global institutions?
That is one of the most interesting questions we've seen so far. If SWIFT is losing market share because of alternative platforms, the actual performer of the SWIFT transactions, which is the US dollar, will lose significance as the global currency denominator. The European Union is pushing forward the idea of the euro becoming the center point of alternative platforms to SWIFT. If you take into account what is happening currently with the trade war between US and China, China is pushing forward also the alternative ways of cryptocurrency and digital currencies that allow transactions and capital movements across the world. So SWIFT and the denomination of traditional instruments such as the US dollar is losing.
Time now to talk to Atifa, our journalist and researcher, who joins us to tell us more about the topics we have at hand. Very catchy topic that you gave to me to introduce you. The U.S. seeks to establish a world order according to its own agenda. What do you have for us?
Well, what the Americans are calling it is that American world order. Let's look at the social media platform. This tweet is by Rainer. It says that U.S. and its allies are trying all that they can to control countries like Venezuela. But the world is changing, and the so-called American world order is not working the same way.
Let's take a look at your final tweet over here.
That think that maybe it's good for change, and maybe the future presidential election in America can change things, and U.S. can be more sharing in the leadership and resources.
Sure, we'll have to wait and see if that happens. But thank you very much. Very good post that you chose for this. Atifa Paydo there. Thanks for her. Now, let's take a look at how the U.S. dominates other global institutions, or has dominance over other global institutions, such as the World Bank and NATO.
The World Bank is another global institution in which the US uses its power to extend its global dominance by proxy. Once again, as the largest shareholder of the organisation, it's clearly the most influential member country and has seen much pressure and criticism of its role. Much like the IMF, the World Bank was born in the post-World War II period and was designed to provide loans and grants aimed at supporting states. However, the World Bank, like the IMF, has systematically made loans to states as a means of influencing US policies. Foreign indebtedness has been, and to this day remains, to be used as an instrument for subordinating the states that borrow money from it, and has seen the World Bank turn a blind eye to lending money to dictators and states who frequently infringe human rights. Whereas the majority of organisations we have discussed in this episode of Economic Divide have been financial institutions, the US also holds influential roles in other groups, with NATO being one of the most obvious. Trump's made it no secret that he's unhappy at the financial commitments by NATO members to the pact, often criticising those who pay less than the suggested 2% of GDP, and praising and rewarding those that do.
For years, presidents have been coming to these meetings and talked about the expense, the tremendous expense for the United States, and tremendous progress has been made. Everyone's agreed to substantially up their commitment. They're going to up it at levels that they've never thought of before.
Trump has repeatedly threatened certain nations who have not paid the full amount, with tones to the tune of no more protection. Yet the whole notion of NATO was designed to provide a defensive pact. Why then has Trump allowed money to come between the so-called allies? It seems that the US are simply no longer content with any accord, deal, pact or organisation they're members of, unless they have totalitarian control over the body, with the US already having pulled out of more trade deals, accords and organisations than ever, and threatening to leave the likes of the UN. How much longer will the world sit back and allow the US to bully and manoeuvre their way into every global body without reply?
Global financial cooperation is not a new thing, with multiple pacts and agreements in place that, in theory, should make the financial world a smoother place. But for the U.S., it seems the near dominance that it has around the world across a host of institutions. It is this dominance that appears to then be giving the U.S. a notion of de facto rule across the world, as it places its dollar as the go-to currency at the heart of institutions such as the World Bank, the IMF, and as we have seen, the IDB. Yet the winds of change are slowly starting to rustle the feathers of those around the world who want to distance themselves from the U.S. dominance and seek alternatives, for example, in the form of the euro, yuan, or even cryptocurrencies. Could the end of the dollar then spell the end of U.S. control of world organizations? Watch this space. As always, don't forget to share your stories with us by visiting our Twitter page using the marker @ED_program, where you can comment on our show. Share a story or tell us about a cause that you are fighting for. We promise to get back to everyone and their comments, so don't be shy. Let's start a conversation together. You can watch this show again or any other previous episodes by visiting our webpage, where we have an on-demand service ready to go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Log on to find out more. That's just about all the time we have for this week's show. So on behalf of myself, Kaveh Tagway, and the whole team here on Economic Divide, thanks for watching. We'll see you again next time. Stay safe.